The wind howled through the jagged cliffs, carrying the scent of pine and blood. 50,000 years ago, the world was a brutal place, where survival meant listening to the whispers of instinct or something darker. In a narrow valley cradled by mountains, a small clan of early humans huddled in a cave, their fire spitting embers into the night. They called themselves the People of the Red Stone, named for the crimson rock that streaked their home. There were 20 of them, bound by blood and fear, led by a wiry man named Kyle, whose eyes seemed to see beyond the flickering light. Kyle was different. He didn't just hunt or carve flint, he listened. To the wind, to the earth, to the bones of the animals they ate. The others trusted him, not because he was the strongest, but because his instincts had saved them before. When the river flooded, when the saber-tooth stalked too close. But tonight, as the stars burned cold above, Kale's face was drawn, his fingers twitching over a pile of deer bones he'd arranged in a circle by the fire. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. His sister, Lyra, crouched beside him, her dark hair matted with clay. She was the clan's storyteller, weaving tales of spirits and heroes to keep the children from crying when hunger gnawed. But even she felt the weight in the air tonight, a pressure that made her throat tighten. "What do you see?" she asked, glancing at the bones. They weren't just scraps to her. They were Kale's oracle, his way of reading the world's hidden truths. Kale didn't answer at first. His eyes darted to the cave's entrance where the darkness seemed to pulse. The bones. "They're whispering," he said finally. Not like before, not warning, something older. Lyra shivered, pulling her furs tighter. The clan was quiet now, the children asleep, the hunters sharpening spears or mending nets. Only old Mara, the clan's healer, watched from her corner, her milky eyes glinting. She hadn't spoken in days, but her presence was a comfort, or it had been until tonight. "Older?" Lyra pressed, her voice low. "What does that mean?" Kale's fingers traced the edge of a bone, its surface etched with strange, spiraling marks he swore he hadn't carved. "Something that was here before us, before the people, before the animals. It's awake now, and it knows we're here." Lyra wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as exhaustion or hunger. But the way Kale's voice trembled, the way the fire seemed to dim as he spoke, rooted her to the spot. She glanced at the others, wondering if they felt it too, the creeping dread that had settled over the cave like a fog. The next morning, the clan set out to hunt. They needed food, the winter was coming, and the elk herds were thinning. Kyle led the way, his spear gripped tightly, but his eyes kept drifting to the ground as if searching for something he couldn't. Name Lyra stayed close, her bow slung over her shoulder, her mind replaying Kale's words, the bones, the whispers. She'd heard stories of spirits, of ancestors who lingered in the wind, but this felt different, wrong. They tracked a wounded mammoth, its blood trail leading them deeper into the valley than they'd ever gone. The air grew colder, the trees sparser, until they reached a clearing ringed by strange stones, tall, jagged, arranged in a circle like the bones Kale had laid out. The hunters froze, their breaths visible in the chill. The mammoth's trail ended here, but there was no carcass, no sign of a struggle, just silence, thick and suffocating. "Kale," Lyra whispered, her voice barely a breath. "What is this place?" He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the center of the circle where a single bone protruded from the earth. a massive rib too large to belong to any creature they knew. It was pale, almost glowing, and etched with the same spiraling marks as the deer bones. Cale stepped forward, drawn to it like a moth to flame, ignoring Lyra's hissed warning. As he touched the bone, the ground trembled. Not an earthquake, but something softer, like a heartbeat. The hunters gasped, backing away, but Kyle didn't move. His fingers lingered on the bone and his lips parted, as if listening to something no one else could hear. "We shouldn't be here." One of the hunters, a burly man named Tor, growled, "This is cursed ground." "Quiet," Cal snapped, his voice sharp. "It's speaking." "Speaking?" Tor scoffed, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "You're mad, Cale. We need to leave. Now." Before Cale could respond, a sound cut through the air. A low, guttural hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, but it carried weight, like a command. The hunters clutched their spears, their faces pale. Lyra's bow felt useless in her hands. Her arrows no match for whatever this was. "Cale, please," she said, grabbing his arm. "We need to go." But Cale's eyes were distant, glazed, as if he were somewhere else. "It's not angry," he murmured. "It's lonely." The hum grew louder, vibrating in their chests, and the stones around them began to glow faintly, their surfaces pulsing with the same spiraling marks. Lyra's heart pounded, her instinct screaming to run, but she couldn't leave Kyle. Not her brother. Not the man who'd carried her through a blizzard when she was a child, who'd taught her to read the stars. "Cale!" she shouted, shaking him. "Snap out of it!" He blinked as if waking from a dream, but before he could speak, the ground split open. Not a crack, but a deliberate parting, like lips opening to speak. From the earth rose a shape, formless at first, a mass of shadow and bone twisting and coiling like smoke. It wasn't solid, yet it felt alive, its presence pressing against their minds, heavy with sorrow and rage. The hunters screamed, some dropping their spears and fleeing, but the shadow lashed out, tendrils of darkness wrapping around their legs, dragging them back. Tor swung his spear, but it passed through the shadow like air, and a moment later he was gone, pulled into the earth with a sickening crunch. Lyra grabbed Cale, pulling him away from the bone, but he resisted, his eyes locked on the shadow. "It needs us," he whispered. "It's been alone for so long." "What is it?" Lyra cried, her voice breaking. Cale's face twisted, not with fear, but with something like pity. "It's what came before. The first. The one who made the bones." The shadow surged toward them, and Lyra acted on instinct, knocking an arrow and firing. It did nothing, the arrow vanishing into the darkness. But the act broke Coyle's trance, and he stumbled back, finally letting her pull him away. They ran, the hum chasing them, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The other hunters were gone, swallowed by the earth or fled into the forest. Lyra didn't know. All she knew was the cold, the fear, and the weight of Cale's hand in hers. They didn't stop until they reached the cave, collapsing by the fire, their breaths ragged. The clan stared, wide-eyed, demanding answers, but Lyra could barely speak. Cale was worse, his face pale, his hands shaking as he clutched the deer bones he'd carried back. Mara, the old healer, finally spoke, her voice a rasp. "You woke it," she said, her milky eyes fixed on Cale. "The old one, the eater of bones." "What does it want?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. Mara's lips curled into a grim smile. "What all lonely things want." Company that night the cave was silent. the fire low. The clan huddled together, too afraid to sleep. Kyle sat apart, staring at the bones, his fingers tracing the spiraling marks. Lyra watched him, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe they were safe, that the shadow wouldn't follow them. But deep down, she knew better. The hum returned at midnight, soft at first, like a lullaby. The clan stirred, their eyes wide with terror. Lyra grabbed her bow, but Kyle stood, his movements slow, deliberate. "It's calling me," he said, his voice calm, almost serene. "Kale, no!" Lyra lunged for him, but he was already moving toward the cave's entrance, the bones clutched to his chest. The hum grew louder, and the shadows outside seemed to writhe, forming shapes, faces, hands, things that weren't human but felt achingly familiar. "I have to go," Kale said, turning to her. His eyes were clear now, filled with a strange peace. "It's not evil, Lyra, it's just alone. It needs someone to listen." Tears stung Lyra's eyes as she grabbed his arm. "You're not its keeper, you're my brother." He smiled, a sad, fleeting thing. "Tell my story, Lyra, make it a good one." Before she could stop him, he stepped into the darkness. The hum swallowed him and the shadows surged, then vanished. The cave was silent again, the air cold and still. Kyle was gone. The clan mourned, but Lyra couldn't. Not yet. She sat by the fire, carving the spiraling marks into a piece of wood, her hands shaking. She told Kale's story as he'd asked, weaving it into the clan's tales. But every night when the wind howled, she heard the hum, faint but persistent, calling her name. Years later, when Lyra was old and gray, she returned to the clearing. The stones were still there, the rib bone gleaming in the moonlight. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. She felt it. The loneliness, the hunger, the ancient sorrow that had taken her brother. And as she stood there, she whispered, "I'm listening." The hum answered, soft and warm, and Lyra smiled. The frost crunched underfoot as the clan of the Long Shadow moved through the endless tundra. 50,000 years ago, the world was a frozen crucible where every step could be your last. The clan numbered 15, their faces gaunt from weeks of scarce game, their furs patched with sinew and hope. They were led by a woman named Vey, whose scars told stories her tongue never would. She was their rock, their fire, the one who'd faced down a cave bear and lived. But tonight, as the aurora danced green and ghostly above, even Vey's steady hands trembled. They'd found the cave at dusk, a yawning mouth in a hillside, its edges smoothed by time. It was shelter. A rare gift in this merciless land, and the clan needed it. The wind was a knife, and their last fire had died days ago, leaving them to chew frozen roots in the dark. Vey led them inside, her spear raised, her eyes scanning the shadows. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and something sour like spoiled meat. "It's safe," Vey said, her voice echoing off the stone walls. But her son Arun, a lanky boy of 16 winters, lingered at the entrance, his breath clouding the air. "It doesn't feel safe," he muttered, clutching the flint knife his father had carved before the wolves took him. Aaron was no warrior, not yet, but he had a gift. Eyes that saw what others missed. The way a deer's tracks curved before a leap, the way clouds thickened before a storm. Now those eyes were fixed on the cave's depths, where the light from their torches didn't reach. "Enough!" Vey snapped, though her tone softened when she saw his face. We need rest. We'll hunt at dawn. The clan settled in, spreading furs on the cold stone, building a fire with the last of their kindling. The children clung to their mothers, their bellies hollow, while the elders whispered prayers to the spirits of the tundra. Aaron sat apart, his knife in hand, carving aimless patterns into a stick. He couldn't shake the feeling that the cave was watching them, its silence too perfect, too alive. That night, as the fire burned low, Aaron woke to a sound, a faint rhythmic tapping like fingers drumming on stone. It came from deeper in the cave beyond the pool of light. He sat up, his heart pounding, and nudged Vey. She was already awake, her spear across her lap, her eyes glinting in the dark. You hear it? Aaron whispered. Vey nodded, her jaw tight. Stay here. She rose, silent as a shadow, and crept toward the sound, her torch casting jagged shapes on the walls. Aaron disobeyed, following her, his knife gripped so tightly his knuckles ached. The tapping grew louder, faster, then stopped abruptly as they reached a narrow tunnel branching off the main chamber. The air here was colder, the sour smell stronger, and the walls were etched with strange, looping patterns, lines that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. Vey, Aaron hissed, pointing to the floor. There, in the dust, were footprints, not human, but something close with elongated toes and claw-like marks. They led into the tunnel, then vanished as if whatever made them had simply stopped existing. Vey's face hardened, but her voice was steady. We're not alone here. They returned to the clan, waking the others. The hunters gripped their spears, the children whimpered, and the elders' prayers grew frantic. Vey ordered the fire built higher, but the wood was scarce and the flames barely pushed back the dark. The tapping resumed, closer now, joined by a new sound, a low, guttural rasp like breath dragged over stone. We should leave, said Kor, a grizzled hunter with a limp. This place is cursed. We won't survive the night outside, Vey countered. We stay. We fight. Aaron wanted to agree with Kor, to run, but he saw the fear in his mother's eyes. Not for herself, but for the clan. For him. He stayed silent, his knife a cold weight in his hand. At midnight, the rasping became a voice. Not words, not like the clan's tongue, but a sound that carried meaning, heavy with hunger and despair. It came from all around, seeping through the stone, and the clan froze, their breaths held. The children sobbed, and even Kor, who'd laughed at death, clutched his spear like a lifeline. Then the shadows moved. Not cast by the fire, but independent, sliding along the walls like oil. They weren't human, not quite, but they had shapes, long limbs, hollow eyes, mouths that gaped too wide. Aaron's stomach churned as one shadow reached for a child, its fingers stretching only to recoil when Vey thrust her torch forward. "Stay back!" she roared, her voice a raw challenge. The shadows hissed, retreating, but the voice grew louder, pressing against their minds, whispering things Aaron couldn't understand but felt in his bones. Loss, rage, a hunger that spanned millennia. "We need to find it," Vey said, her eyes blazing. "Whatever's doing this, it's in the tunnel." Aaron shook his head, terror rooting him to the spot. "We can't fight that." "We don't have a choice," she said, grabbing his arm. "You're coming with me." She didn't wait for his protest, dragging him toward the tunnel, Kor and two other hunters following. The clan's cries faded behind them as they descended, the air growing colder, the walls closing in. The footprints reappeared, joined by scratches on the stone, as if something had clawed its way through. The voice was deafening now, a chorus of agony, and Aaron's head throbbed, his vision blurring. They reached a chamber vast and domed, its floor littered with bones, not animal but human or something close. Skulls with elongated jaws, limbs too long, fingers curled like talons. In the center stood a pit, black and bottomless, the source of the voice. The shadows were thicker here, circling the pit, their eyes glowing faintly, watching. Vey raised her torch, her face pale but resolute. "Show yourself!" she shouted. The voice answered not with words but with a surge of images. Flashes of a time before the tundra, before the clan, when the earth was young and something else ruled. Creatures that weren't human but thought, felt, loved, and hated. They'd built this place, this hollow, to hide from a world that no longer wanted them. But they couldn't leave, not fully. They were trapped, their souls bound to the pit, feeding on the lives that stumbled into their domain. Aaron staggered, the images overwhelming, but Vey stood firm, her spear raised. "You won't take us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The shadows lunged and the fight was chaos. Kor swung his spear, but a shadow tore through him, his scream cut short as he collapsed, his body shriveling like dried meat. The other hunters fell, their torches snuffed out, but Vey fought like a storm, her spear drawing arcs of light. Aaron, frozen, watched his mother battle the impossible, her scars glowing in the torchlight. "Aaron!" she shouted, dodging a shadow's claws. "The pit! It's their anchor!" He understood, or thought he did. The pit was their heart, their prison, if they could destroy it. But how? His eyes fell on the bones, the skulls, and an idea, mad, desperate, formed. He grabbed a skull, its surface cold and slick, and ran to the pit's edge, the shadows shrieking as he raised it. "Stop!" Vey cried, but Aaron was already moving, hurling the skull into the pit. It vanished, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the ground shook, the voice rising to a scream, and the shadows surged toward Aaron, their eyes burning with hate. Vey tackled him, shielding him with her body as the chamber collapsed. Stone rained down, the pit imploding, swallowing the shadows in a roar of dust and darkness. When the shaking stopped, Aaron was alive, Vey's arms around him, her breath ragged but warm. They crawled back to the main chamber, bloodied and broken, to find the clan still there, the shadows gone. The fire burned low, the air clean, but the cost was heavy. Kor and the others were lost, their bodies unrecoverable. The clan mourned, but Vey led them out at dawn, her scars now joined by new wounds, her eyes haunted but unbroken. Aaron never spoke of the hollow, but he carried its weight. Years later, as a man, he returned to the cave, now sealed by time. He left an offering, a flint knife carved with looping patterns, and whispered, "Rest now." The tundra was silent, but he felt it, a faint, grateful sigh carried on the wind. The fog rolled in at twilight, thick as marrow, swallowing the forest in a gray shroud. 50,000 years ago, the world was a place of teeth and shadows, where survival meant outrunning what hunted you. The clan of the broken spear, 12 strong, moved through the dense pines, their steps muffled by moss and fear. They were led by a man named Thar, broad-shouldered and quiet, whose hands could snap a boar's neck but trembled when he spoke of his lost daughter, Sila. taken by fever 2 winters past. They were fleeing, though none would admit it. The valley they'd called home had turned against them, game vanished, rivers soured, and strange lights danced in the sky at night. Thar had seen them, red and pulsing like eyes watching from the stars. The clan's elder, a woman named Isme with a voice like gravel, called it a curse, a punishment for some forgotten sin. Thar didn't care for her talk of spirits, but he couldn't deny the dread that clung to them, heavier with each step. They'd found a clearing to camp, a rare open space where the fog was thinner, the ground dry. Thar ordered a fire built, though the wood was damp and smoked more than it burned. The clan huddled close, their faces drawn, their spears within reach. Rin, a young hunter with a quick laugh and quicker hands, tried to lighten the mood, telling stories of his first hunt, but his voice faltered when the fog thickened, pressing against the firelight like a living thing. "It's just fog," Thar said, his voice steady, but his eyes scanned the trees. He felt it, a presence, not animal, not human, but something that watched. He'd felt it since they left the valley, a prickling on his neck, a whisper in his dreams. Sila's voice soft and pleading, calling him back. Ismi sat by the fire, her fingers weaving cord from sinew, her eyes distant. "It's not fog," she said, not looking up. "It's their breath." Rin laughed, nervous. "Whose breath, old woman?" Ismi's hands stilled. "The ones who see, the ones who wait." Thar's jaw tightened. "Enough. We need sleep, not stories." But Ismay's words lingered, and when the clan slept, Thar stayed awake, his spear across his knees. The fog was alive, he was sure of it, swirling in patterns no wind could make, and in it he saw shapes. Faint, fleeting, but there. Faces too long, too sharp, with eyes that burned red like the lights in the valley. At midnight, Rin screamed. Thar was on his feet in an instant, spear raised as the clan woke in panic. Rin was at the clearing's edge, clutching his arm, blood seeping through his fingers. "It grabbed me," he gasped, his eyes wild. "In the fog, it had eyes." Thar pulled him back to the fire, checking the wound. It wasn't deep, but the cuts were precise, like claw marks, though no animal Thar knew could move so fast. The clan pressed closer, their fear a tangible thing, and Ismay whispered, "They've marked him." "Stop it," Thar growled, but his heart wasn't in it. He'd seen the eyes too, just for a moment, glowing in the fog. And he'd heard it. Sila's voice, clearer now, calling his name. They didn't sleep again. At dawn, the fog lifted slightly, enough to see the trees, and Thar led them deeper into the forest, hoping to outrun whatever stalked them. But the eyes followed, glinting in the mist, always at the edge of sight. Rin grew pale, his wound festering despite Ismi's herbs, and he muttered about dreams. Red eyes, a voice that promised rest if he'd just follow. By the third day, the clan was breaking. 2 hunters vanished in the night, their spears left behind, their tracks ending in the fog. The children clung to their mothers, silent, their eyes hollow. Thar's strength was fading, his dreams filled with Sila, her face pale, her hands reaching from the mist. He wanted to believe it was her, his girl, but the voice was wrong, too cold, too hungry. Ismi finally spoke, her voice low, meant for Thar alone. "They're not spirits, not like we know. They're older. From before the trees, before the stars. They feed on us, on our pain, our hope. They took your daughter, Thar. Now they want you." Thar's hand tightened on his spear, his grief a raw wound. "Why me?" "Because you love," Ismi said. "They taste it like blood in the water." He wanted to deny it, to call her mad, but the eyes in the fog were real, and Sila's voice was louder now, pulling him toward the trees. That night Rin broke. He stood, his eyes glazed, and walked into the fog, ignoring the clan's cries. Thar chased him, but Rin was gone, swallowed by the mist, his laughter echoing, then silence. Thar returned, his face carved with despair. "We fight," he said, his voice breaking. "No more running." Ismay nodded, her hands steady as she handed him a pouch of herbs. "Burn these. It won't kill them, but it might weaken them. You'll need to face her, Thar, the thing that wears her face." The clan built a fire larger than before, and Thar burned the herbs, the smoke thick and bitter. The fog recoiled, the eyes dimming, and for the first time Thar saw them clearly. Creatures not human, their bodies twisted, their faces a mockery of flesh, with mouths that split too wide. They hissed, circling the fire, but the smoke held them back, and Thar stepped forward, his spear raised. "Sila," he roared, his voice raw, "come to me." The fog parted, and she was there. Not Sila, not truly, but a thing wearing her skin, her eyes red, her smile wrong. It spoke, its voice a blend of Sila's and something ancient, promising peace, love, and end to pain. Thar's heart shattered, but his hand was steady as he thrust his spear, not at the creature, but at the ground where its shadow lay. The creature screamed, a sound that tore at the mind, and the fog erupted, the eyes surging forward. The clan fought, their spears useless against the creatures, but the smoke gave them time. Thar struck again, his spear carving the earth, and the creature faltered, its form unraveling, revealing a void beneath, a hunger that had no end. "Run!" Thar shouted, and the clan fled, Ismay leading them, her voice a beacon. Thar stayed, facing the thing that wasn't Sila, his spear buried in its shadow. The fog closed in, the eyes burning, and Thar whispered, "I'm sorry," as the world went dark. The clan survived, led by Ismay to a new valley free of fog. They told Thar's story, of the man who faced the eyes to save them, but they never spoke of Sila, not truly. And in the forest, the fog lingered, red eyes watching, waiting for the next to love too much.